are going to talk about some of our practices. I don't know if they're best practices, but they're what we do when we're getting ready to teach or preach a series or a class, and what we're reading and looking at in the process there.
That
Um,
means they are not the best practices. That's exactly what that means.
um, Partial full disclosure, sometimes Terry talks about how this was his idea. This was not his idea. This was my
No.
idea. So if it's bad, blame Terry.
Don't we
Uh,
know by now that if there's the word reading in a broadcast for us, I had nothing to do with it? Isn't that pretty much standard at this point?
you read. You don't want to be known as somebody who reads. You don't like reading
I
sometimes,
didn't
but you
start
read.
this narrative. You started the narrative in this little thing about me never reading. It was you and guys like Mark Russell and Crozier who always say I don't read. So let's just be
Well,
clear about that.
I'm just, look, I will tell you two things that are true. I think some of the books on your shelves have moved recently, but I'm not
No.
quite sure if that's because new Bibles came in to take some spots and you had to adjust the stacks a little bit.
Look, the new
Um,
Bible is right here, okay? Like that's it's in the box. That's where it stays if
yeah,
it's
because you
not
don't
in
read it.
use. No, I do. And it's beautiful. I mean, look, it's a Skylar
That's
two-tone.
nice. That's nice.
Yeah, look at the font of this thing, by the way. Look how good that is.
Yeah.
That's
And the
fantastic.
older you get, the more important that is, Terry.
Oh yeah, because I switched from my Allen to the Skylar largely because I can read the Skylar a little bit better. By the way, update. Last week I was put on bifocals. Yeah,
Yeah,
this contact is different from this contact now, and my eyes are constantly battling each other to see who wants to read.
that's exciting. So
It
we've,
is.
I think last week I asked the question. So it's up to you if you want to ask a question to start our conversation today. If you don't, I've got a stack here
But you
of,
gave me like 5 seconds notice to ask a question. That's not fair.
oh, it is fair. I'll ask a question. You ready?
Sure.
All right. So, funniest story that you're comfortable to share from your time at Florida College.
Oh, none of them. Are you kidding me? Like,
I'll tell one,
what
and
is
then
what
I'll
is
tell
the
you. I'll
statute of
tell one.
limitations? By the way, what is the statute of limitations for that? Shane
Yeah.
Scott says a Bible that's falling apart belongs to a person whose life is not. Not if you buy really good Bibles. And Shane, I know you buy really good Bibles,
Yeah.
and the only reason your Bibles fall apart is because you profusely sweat on the pages. I know that for a fact. Yeah. So funniest story,
I got one.
man.
If you need time, I got something for you. So,
This is
um,
about you and not me, right? Like you're not
correct.
throwing me under the bus. Okay, go ahead.
No, I'll throw you under the bus later.
Okay.
So I think it was skip day towards the end of my second year at Florida College, and everyone went out to the park. Leslie Park was the destination for that day. We packed like 14 people in the Oldsmobile Delta 88. Maybe it was the first year there. Either way, we get there, we rent canoes. That sounds like the thing to do. So everyone's in canoes. There's probably 10 to 15 canoe pods going down the river in different amounts. And myself and whoever was in my canoe, I think it was David, Dan, and a couple other things, came across a sandbar. And immediately we believed that we were pirates. And so we then beach our canoes, hop out, and every single set of canoes after us was dumped, like period. And so you had like Jared Ford, he got dumped out. A bunch of other guys and all their stuff dumped out. Ira McKell came by with somebody in his canoe dumped out. Jesse Flowers dumped out. Doesn't matter who they were. All of them. So I think Sandusky was on the river that day, dumped out. So we're doing that all like the crowd comes in, we're going out, we're dumping the canoes. A little bit later, we're back in our canoes, paddling along, and the largest reptilian creature in water I have ever seen in my life smacks the side of our canoe. The tail is as long as our canoe, it feels like. The tail
Come on,
comes
this
up
this is a
and
fish story. It's like a
smacks the
four.
side of it.
It's like an 18-inch little baby alligator that knocked you out of your
No,
canoe.
no, and it was like, wait a minute, we were just in this water. We were just in this
Dude,
water.
see, you always exaggerate your stories.
Yep, there you go. It's a canoe slash gator story with witnesses.
See, my problem is I don't know how many. Like, there's so many. Should we talk about the time when I was a door monitor that I let a guy have an iguana and it got loose in the dorm and we couldn't find it? There's that one's a bad one. How about the fact that my floor, which was, I was in Wilson Hall, and up until the year I was there, my second year, the doors had see-through windows on them and stuff. But we had a guy who was bigger than me who walked around pretty much without clothes on. So we had to black out all the windows because of this dude. Typical FC stuff, There's a lot of funny stories at FC. I think, the best story for me is the story about, and I don't know if you were on this team, till we were there, UDFAC, the faculty team, had never lost a game of football, ever. And we beat them in the last play because their silly quarterback threw an interception that one of our guys took back 80 yards. But Marty Pickup, who is my counselor, good friend, we miss Marty, fantastic guy, always made this big deal out of, if y'all beat us, we'll kiss your cleats. And so we actually made them kiss our cleats. Were you even a part of that? Were you on that?
That was a semester before I came.
Yeah.
The next year,
and after that, by the way, the UDFAC team was no more. Like, they were terrible. There was guys that would drive an hour away that were alumni to play in that game to keep that record. So I'm a part of history.
Yeah, the following year, same society, a few different players. We actually got Kenny to change the rules in flag football because we didn't really have a lot of speedy talent, but we had all the big guys on campus. So we determined that we could actually run the ball far enough to a first down every single time.
Well, the year I was there, they allowed us to block again,
right,
which had been taken away before I got there. So the 2 years I was there, we were allowed to do that. And this year, it's a 3-man offensive line, and I think we weighed right at like 850 to 900 pounds. And we had Jason Wagner, it's my sophomore year, playing quarterback, who went to Middle Tennessee State on a football scholarship, and we just destroyed people. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, he came back the next year as an UDFAC guy and actually played against us on the UDFAC
not
team.
Fun.
But we had like Balsamo, who was a big kid, Chris Nicholson, and Bobby Blackburn, who was a solid player, and a couple other big guys. Scott Richardson was playing, and so we stacked the line with running backs on the wings. And so we had 5 guys on our offensive line who easily, we were averaging 250 a kid at that point. And so we just ran over people. I remember stepping on Gary Chumley. But let's get going.
I remember bruising Big Jim. Big Jim took me to his office and showed me the bruises on his body from that game because I was stunning the whole time. Nobody would blitz Jason, and I was the center. So as soon as I got done, I would just pick Marty or Jim, who were their defensive ends, and I'd go hit him as hard as I could, full steam. A lot of fun,
good times.
By the way.
Good times.
And since Jim couldn't give me a grade, he became the target.
Yeah. All right, so let's dig into this. There's a lot going on with what we have laid out for us. It's not super complicated, but I think it's important. And I'm going to walk us into it from my perspective, and Terry will probably chime in as normal. As a young evangelist, figuring out how I was going to prepare for a in-depth study of any kind was a giant soupy mess. And I say it in this way, there's challenges for me because one, I wasn't quite sure what my goals were all the time. Like, what was I supposed to accomplish? What was the purpose of this class? What are the big ideas? And so I said, I got to research. And I will always tell myself I'm doing research. In time, though, I learned something. I wasn't actually doing research. Like, it's not really qualified as research. It's not what you would talk about. I was reading, and I was reading a lot and taking a lot of notes. And so in the classical terms, it might be more firmly rooted in, I was doing literary review and analysis. I was kind of reading other people's stuff that actually had done research because they were grappling with original languages. They were looking at archaeology from a first-person research perspective, and they were curating that information down for me. And so once I figured that part out, things actually got a lot easier for me when I stopped calling it research. And that may not seem like a big deal, but for me, it was huge because then it said, okay, now this is where I belong in the strata. Like, if I'm not doing research, that I shouldn't stress because I don't understand these things that are outside my field, the things that I'm good at. But it used to stress me out. But once I kind of, okay, I'm not doing that. I need to pay attention to how they approach it and why they come to their conclusions, but not necessarily the raw information underneath, because I wasn't skilled and maybe I'm still not skilled to interact with it. So when I switched to saying I'm reading, that changed my focus because I could read and I could take notes. So that was like a big step for me, is to understand that what I was doing was reading in preparation for a class, or studying, but not exactly studying. Because studying for me always comes under the concept of there's a test. If I study, I'm studying for a test. So that's a personal thing. Maybe that's not you. And so then with that concept of now I got to read, I started figuring out a little bit better process, a little bit more academic. And I'll go through some of the things I kind of now do to approach reading in preparation to teach. But Terry, what about you? With my little brief introduction there, that's my perspective coming into it. What's your thoughts on your approach to how you got to where you're at?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things to keep in mind for everybody is that what Phil's hitting on is true, and at some point, unless you really are going to be some kind of guy that comes up with some original stuff, you're all really reading the work of somebody else. Like in most of our cases, if we read something and it's taking information from somebody else, we could go to that level, but we'll find out they're taking information from somebody else, and it's kind of like this inverted triangle where there is no end at the. And I think one of the things is to be okay with that. I think that's one of the things is that you need to be okay with reading instead of being the guy that has all the ideas. And in the process of that, you're going to find a lot of trusted resources. You're going to read better readers in that sense. You're going to read guys that did a better job than you did, and you're going to fall in love with some favorites. You're going to have some old reliables. But I think that's also dangerous, is to only do that. You need to try to get beyond that sometimes. Even if it's something that you don't necessarily agree with, you still need to be challenged and be able to kind of go and say, oh, well, here's another thought. One of the reasons I think that's important is because just because I read my old reliables doesn't mean that everybody else in the auditorium that I'm teaching in that moment is reading old reliables. And how am I prepared for that? I mean, one of the ways I prepare is expanding those sources. So reading plays a huge role in all that. And yes, I do read, and from a variety of sources. And I think that's the key to that. And while you see lots of books behind me, I will admit that is slowly transitioning to a more digital platform than previously for me.
Is that where I spiked the football? Is this that moment where I,
Yeah. The green books behind me. Let me say this too. There's a lot of books. The bookshelf right behind me is mainly made up of books I'll probably never get rid of. And some of that is just sentimental value. The majority of those green commentaries behind me are older out-of-print commentaries that my dad used. And his notes are in those. Those were his favorite commentaries. So even if I become, convinced, which I'm not completely convinced, but if I became convinced they had absolutely zero value to them, they would still be on my shelf. Because of the sentimental value. And the ones right below that you see, the Baker set there, the Kistemaker and Hendrickson, which is pretty good stuff. Most of those were given to me at my internship as a part of a going away gift. So tremendously sentimental for me. So those books have been moved 4 times. They've been with me for over 20 years. They're going to be with me until I die, and I give them to my kids because they're sentimental. How often do I pull one of those books off and read it? I mean, the green ones, the majority of them are online. And a lot of times I will just go and pull down the PDF and read it on my screen because it's easier. Yeah. So things have changed, I guess, is what I'm saying in all of that.
Right. So this is my process for it. As an example, I'm getting prepared in 2021. One of the things I've got on the table, amongst many, is a series that I've planned to go through Revelation in 12 steps. And so we're going to have a sermon a month through Revelation. That's a big thing. And so my process to read and get ready for that is kind of already moving down its chain. The first thing I do is identify everything I've read before. And so I've got a list of all the things that I've already read in regards to Revelation. And so some of those commentaries might be familiar to people. I've read Ogden, I've read Harkrider, Haley, Summer, McGuigan. Those are restoration-focused commentaries that are dealing with the text of Revelation at a commentary perspective. Now, then that means this is what I have already exposed myself to. And if I said I've read it, that generally means I've gone from cover to cover because I read it cover to cover in part to teach the class before. And so I've read those things. I also then have, what am I going to read in preparation for it? And so that's the next phase of it. And I've got a list of those guys and some stuff by De Silva, Mounts, Beale, Gordon. Those are going to be the books that I'll read in preparation for it. And they're going to span the gamut of a devotional level book, which is a great look at a text that's going to have a fairly condensed perspective to the text. It's going to highlight the very big things. I might have a standard work in play, which is going to go into more detail. And I might, at times, cherry pick from a more academic work, which is going to be advanced. And it's going to deal with very complex parts, but I probably won't read the entire book. I'll have it as a resource. When I come to a section that I want to dig a little deeper into, I might open it up and read a segment of that. And that's going to help me plan out. So I already know what my chapters are going to be each month. I already kind of know what the theme is going to be. And I already kind of know roughly what the titles of those lessons might be. And so I'll use that as the preparation. And then in reading, over the course of writing the sermons that haven't even been written yet, I'll have one or two typically very new to me books that I'll read with those sermons. And so when I'm writing a sermon that week, one of those two books, or maybe even both, I'll read the chapters relevant to the chapters I'm going to preach from that week. Because in the end, what I'm doing is I need reflection, not research at that point. I need to reflect upon the text because I'm constantly reading the chapters I'm preaching from over the course of that week. And so if it's going to be chapter 1, I'm going to read chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day in preparation to write that manuscript. When people talk about how much time does it take a sermon, write a sermon for me, I'm writing Revelation sermons that will be preached in January in principle right now, because I'm doing research, but not really research because it's just reading and reflection. I'm doing review. I'm putting all my notes together. I'm making my citation lists. And so at the end of the sermon, I'll have a list of all works cited and things I might quote. And even if it's not cited, it might still end up in the outline. So I know where I got it from, and I can attribute the source if someone asks, hey, where'd that come from? Well, it came from Mounts or Beale or De Silva. And he made this really cool point about the perspective of what a nation looks like and how eventually everybody's Babylon if you're not in the Elohim of God, in the kingdom of God, in the focus of getting spiritual things. So that's my process there for like how I go through gathering those things. I'll talk for a second on how I add sources for a moment, but I really think it's important to kind of define what you've read, what you're going to be reading, and then what you will read alongside while you'll teach, because that will influence the outcome.
Yeah, and I think one of the things people don't realize is how long it takes to prepare this stuff. This isn't done the day before. And, we add other, you're talking about we're reading. We could add other things to that podcast. We listen along those lines, which is also a huge part, full disclosure, when I get ready to do, we've been preaching through the minor prophets, and you think about that, and I've already preached through that before, so I reflect on that, but then I'm adding to that. One of the first things I do every week, I've got a minor prophet to speak on, is go watch the Bible Project video of that minor prophet, just as a kind of good overview, and they do a good job breaking that down. It takes 5 minutes, but that's something that's really simple. It's interesting too that, so if I'm teaching a class, that preparation starts literally months before, because I pretty much always write my own material. So if I'm going to write my own material, one of the things I have to do is I have to go way back in time to be able to write that material. And by the way, I also always bind my material and give you the whole quarter at a time, which forces me to prepare that months before we get to that point to be able to do that. So, for instance, I have material that I wrote on Revelation that's heavily influenced by not all of the things that you said, but some of those things, but then also, of all things, Mark, well, not Mark Roberts' book. By the way, Mark Roberts' book on understanding apocalyptic literature is required reading for anybody who's going to teach Revelation, and I'm surprised you didn't include that in your list.
It's in there. It's not stuff
Yeah.
that is like the current priority. I've read a couple other things, in
Yeah.
advance, but detailed it out.
So between that and also, of all things, the David Banning High School book on just the method of how he teaches Revelation is a great source to get you not to focus on the wrong things. So, and so it's those kind of things that you probably wouldn't think about. Not saying I won't read De Silva, but while some guys are over here reading Bill De Silva, I'm reading a classwork book sometimes that says, hey, don't just go through this verse by verse. Here's a way to present this that's way
Yeah.
more effective. So expand your horizons in all of those ways is really what I'm saying.
And again, keep notes about,
Yeah.
like, have a document that's part of your introductory package if you're ever going to go through this again, where you have those grand ideas, those good concepts or good principles. Hey, I learned this here. Write that out, include it in there and cite it. The reason I say cite that is not because you're going to publish in a publication. You will eventually want to know where you got that, to read it a second time and to dig into it. Um, and so I think it's just kind of, important to key into that, because in the end, what you're doing is you're building the kind of the foundations to reconnect to the text. It's not just repetition. You could read through your Bible year by year by year by year, and you should, but you may not connect with it in the way that you're desiring to make a sermon or a class out of it, where you can teach the vital principles that need to be taught to draw people to God, to warn them of the dangers that exist in the earthly realm and the spiritual realm, and how those interactions can maybe strengthen our faith or weaken our faith, or maybe even help us navigate a single moral issue that's incredibly challenging. Because at times, a single moral issue is the challenge of our lives. And I'm using Revelation as an example just because it's the one that I'm doing next, one of the ones I'm doing next. But I'll add this. What I just described for Revelation as a preparatory process is exactly what I do for teaching any textual or expository setting. Whether I'm going to do a Bible class and we're going to do a textual look at a series of passages, a Bible class where we're going to look at the Kings or Chronicles or Samuel, essentially the same process is in play, where I define what I've read, what I need to read, and what I will read while we're going through it. That's basically the cycle that I use. It's effective for me.
By the way,
And
let
maybe,
me throw this out there. This is why it's so important for planning. It is another thing is, and I'm not just talking about sermons. Like, I think we've all been at those places where the adult Bible class curriculum isn't really laid out, and we decide what we're going to necessarily teach next quarter about the last 4 weeks of the current quarter. And if that's going on, it makes it really hard for guys who want to properly prepare to do that. I mean, I think that's one of the things to point out. So just a message from me, and I think you'd agree with this, Phil, to leadership in the churches: have a much more extensive plan than you're used to having. In your classes, have a 1, 2, 3, 4 year plan, and plan your teachers out. Especially, I think it's important for even the non-preachers. Hey, if a guy knows he's going to teach Acts in a year, give him a year to prepare to teach Acts, because he's going to have to work that around his secular job, his family, and all those kind of things. Whereas with us, we might be able to recover quickly and do some things, but it's still not going to be to the extent we want it to be. So it's very important in this idea. If you don't give us notice, right? You've probably been there too, right, Phil? At some point, if I don't know what's coming up, I can't do all this preparation in the right way, which then lowers the standard of quality because I don't have the time to do what I would like to do.
let me turn the corner just a little bit. A superpower that I have is taking simple things and making them complex, but it's important to take complex things and make them simple. And here's a way to think about it. I've been talking about teaching it or preaching it maybe at, let's say, this level. But what if I needed to simplify it down? The process doesn't change. I'm still going to go through an information gathering phase of focusing on what my purpose phase is by reading and preparing and studying. But let's say I'm going to teach the story of the patriarchs to a younger generation. And by younger generation, let's say under 10 or under 5. I'm going to do some things that are going to be different because they're going to create some advantages for me. So I'm going to search out songs that I could sing along with that age bracket, because that's not a strength for me. I don't have like this repertoire of Bible songs in my head. And that means I'm probably going to spend an hour trying to learn those songs to my satisfaction so that I can sing them with that younger age bracket, because I want them to retain it. And I'm going to do that instead of maybe building visual media and PowerPoint charts, because I think that might be a better tool for that age bracket. So that group kind of goes, boom, I'm going to remember it. I'm going to remember those things. And I'm going to narrow the focus down even into a smaller perspective, and say, okay, now what are the 5 things they're going to lead? Okay, I can't do 5 because they won't remember it. So what are the 2 things I want them to remember? Or the 1 thing I want them to remember? What songs will teach that same principle? What passages can we maybe sing together or say together? And what biblical stories can I retell to them that reinforce it that they might already know? I'm going to interact in an entirely different way, but I'm still going to do all that research, because if I'm going to teach Revelation to 5-year-olds, which you might want to teach the big story of Revelation to 5-year-olds, I got to know it first before I can smooth it down in order to accomplish the big thing.
And then you got to take into account that for 5-year-olds, you divide their age into the time you have. So if it's a 45-minute class, you have to have 9 different activities. And that takes a lot of time to figure all that out. Like all of this stuff, I think is the key is you can't prepare to teach a class on the way to church. And I think that's one of the keys is you can't, let your wife drive and you figure out what you're going to say about Revelation 1 through 3 while she's doing the 30-minute drive to the church building. Just, it doesn't work that way. So it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of reading. One of the things, by the way, that I really love to do, and I've said this before, is, and you talk about reading it, the chapters you're going to do daily. I mean, both of us do this. We read through the entire book multiple times before we teach it. And I do that in the reader's version. So there's no, let me hang up on this. There are no, there are no chapter divisions, no verse divisions, and especially in a book like Revelation, man, that's really powerful because you're reading it the way it was supposed to be read. It's read like a story. It's read in its completeness. Again, I would just encourage you guys that's phase 1. Phase 2 is to go back and reflect on what you've already read. Phase 3 is to search out new sources. And in theory, every time you reteach something, you should add more sources to your bibliography for what you're teaching. That's the purpose here.
Kenny Embry's in our inside chat asking us a bunch of questions, and so I'm going to answer them both to him as I text back to him, but also everybody. He asks, is this just for preachers? And absolutely not. It's preacher specific because that's what Terry and I do. And some of the things we do kind of narrow into the preacher's work and what preachers do because that's what we know. Let's just be fair. And there are some times where we try to do our very best to turn the camera around and to give that breaking of the fourth wall kind of thing where we are self-reflective and a participant in that regard. Goatees are optional, although not required, preferable for Terry. I'm sporting, as I've been told recently, the summer Santa look. Tacos on the beach
actually has
look.
a beard. It's just so white it blends into his skin and you can't tell.
Right. My skin is more like burnt red at this point. It's just kind of perpetually red. But
that goes back to your hostile boat parade that you experienced last weekend. It's a whole other broadcast.
Maybe we'll have a special episode of the follies of Phil.
Phil's follies.
Yeah. But really that's just kind of a basic breakdown of like reading in preparation to teach. It doesn't really matter the subject, although we're talking about the areas where theoretically Terry and I have subject matter expertise. It's a questionable accusation at that point that we actually have any kind of real expertise. But I do think it's important. And here's another benefit. We talked about this in the sense of kind of building this process. You'll become more efficient at it. You will become more effective at it if you continue to use a system that works, rather than, well, I'll do it this way this time and another way a different time. And that efficiency can be then a value in one of two ways. One, you can either reduce the preparation time to get ready for classes if you've got a busy thing going on, or you can expand the work that you're doing. If you become more efficient at a thing, you can add on extra responsibilities or teaching environments or other things, and then roll that into whatever else is going on. So teaching one class can become, I'm able to schedule to teach 2 classes. I'm able to schedule to teach 4 classes. And I know what it's going to look like. And if someone that says, hey, will you teach a class with me or for in this thing, you now know how much it's going to take out of you to do that. Because you have an institutional knowledge on a personal level that says, well, that's going to be a 2-hour block a week for me to do that. Can I do that? Well, I can do that. Or you can say, I really can't do that right now. Can we start it here? Or maybe this other brother in the congregation would be a great fit for you to sit down and study through that, because they're really skilled on it. They've taught it before, and the family is strengthened that way. The family of God is better off that way. And so I really think, like, just a quick thought for the day is to think about your reading and preparation for it. I'll say this on the other side of it. Sometimes, I don't know if Terry sees this, folks will say, hey, what's a good commentary on X? People will ask that question on Facebook, in person. And I always am inclined to ask a question. What have you already read? Because what's a good commentary is a very subjective thing, even if it's from a very well-schooled individual. They're very studied. Maybe they share the same faith principles that I do. Maybe they're a disciple of Jesus. Because sometimes I read commentaries that are written by individuals who are actually not disciples of Jesus. Maybe they're Jews, Jewish individuals from that perspective. Maybe they're coming from an entirely different worldview, and I need to read that perspective on something. So even if they've got shared principles with me, it may not be a good commentary for me, because it may just repeat what I already know. As an example, Haley and Harkrider, 2 excellent students of the Bible, 2 excellent commentaries for what they are, but in the end, they are 2 very similar commentaries. And so in the brevity of time that I have to prepare, reading Harkrider and Haley may not be the best thing for me. Now, it was a very good thing to do 20 years ago for Phil, but not for today. I might review some of their work at times when I try to look at my notes and say, oh, remember Harkrider said this, or Haley said that. Go back and look at the actual commentary, derive an opinion, and then kind of say, okay, this is what took place. Now, what else do I need to know? Is there more information on the table? Has there been changes in archaeology, changes in language? The answer to those 2 things, massive changes in the last 40 years in regards to language and archaeology that can radically improve our understanding of the 1st century and the imagery that was used in that time frame.
Well, and additionally, when people ask me those kind of questions, of course, one of the things I often have started doing now is just referring them to the Robert's list of recommended commentaries, which is a great list. It's a great source. It breaks it down in different ways. But the other thing, Phil, that so often I ask people is, well, a lot of that depends on how much you're willing to spend on commentaries. Like, this for you and me, this is our tools, right? This is our toolbox. Somebody who's teaching Acts one time, they may not want to spend $100 on commentaries this month, So that and that's a very real consideration for everybody.
2 quick things about that. Remember, congregate in a congregation can give you access to expanded resources.
Yeah.
Larger churches might even consider using Logos on an institutional level. Kenny asked this question: do you notice that you're gravitating towards digital text, videos, products versus paper books? Answer to that is absolutely. Yeah. 100% for me.
Selling all of his library. What you see behind him is his library.
Yeah, this is the prized book, or things I can only find in print right here. So there's my fancy Bibles here. some songbooks there. And these are some older books that are only available in print. I can't get them digitally. There's a few more on that side. And then I've got a half of a bookshelf of the remainder of my print library. If Kenny wants to buy it, I'll sell them at a great deal if anyone else wants to buy it. I'll send you a link in a second to Mark Russell's list, but just Google commended commentary list. One of the sources for it should come back from the a church in Florida, Palm Springs Church of Christ, I think.
Orlando.
Yeah, I think that one will probably comes back with it.
Yeah, and for me, most of my books back here are sentimental. We talked about that earlier, Kenny, and I am gravitating more towards the digital, just for a lot of reasons. One of the things in my life, because I'm a caretaker at home a lot for my mom and my wife's father, it allows me to share my resources even between computers, because I have a Mac Mini I use at home more than my laptop, and I can, the digital stuff translates across the board for all of that. And so for me, it makes a lot more sense. But the books I have, when I moved here from Memphis, I think I gave away a couple hundred books. Got rid of a couple hundred books because I just didn't have a use for those. And quite frankly, this bookshelf over here that you see, a lot of those I could probably do without. I just use them for artificial intelligence. So that's where we're at this point.
Well, and for me, Kenny's talking about Blue Letter Bible. My progress in the digital realm, kind of on this reading stuff, is going to be, I started using BibleWorks when it was given to me, and it's a great language tool. It had a few commentaries, and this was early in the availability of digital stuff. I was still using a PC, and it was great. It did awesome stuff with the language, way more capable than I was or am. BibleWorks is no longer a supported platform. It still functions, but they're not selling it or maintaining it anymore. And I've long since moved into Logos, or Logos personally, heavily invested there, both in time and economics. Is where my library is now, but it's cheaper than a print library, book for book.
Yeah.
An example of that is a commentary that's on my want list but not purchase list. It deals with Ezekiel in John and all of the references in the text of Ezekiel into the Gospel of John. Really academically heavy. The print version is $200. The Logos edition is $22. You decide which one is the best for you. I'm not buying the print one.
And that's Phil's way of asking for a GoFundMe amount to be able to. But look, I mean, at the end of the day, I started on eSword years ago because the guy who developed it lived in the community I was in and gave me a CD of it, and it was free. I think it's still out there roaming around the web.
eSword's still around.
It's just all free domain stuff. And I'll just say, if you don't want to spend money on some digital stuff, that's not bad. But Logos is just several years ago I invested too, and man, it's powerful. And every time I go to study something, I'll go through and I'll look and I'll pick a couple more commentaries up every time. So every time I go through a book, one of the things I purposely do is I expand my resource list digitally in that area.
Right. Kenny also mentions how much he would pay for Phil Roberts stuff in a digital format, and I would participate in that GoFundMe. I would participate in that Kickstarter. I would participate in that. And I know I'm not alone. Here's one thing I have to tie it together. So now you've got this concept I've read along, and everything I'm reading, by the way, in the new reads is all Logos. I can copy, cite, and paste right into I'm using the sermon editor, which is built into Logos to build my class outline. The citation comes right in with it. It actually links back to the original text where it came from. So if I ever need to go back to it, it will go back to it. And so now it's all integrated together, and I've got an inexpensive iPad that I can pull up. My entire library is essentially available on that iPad. Every single book that I pulled from and every single citation and source that's in Logos is there. And I'm particular. At this point, I will not purchase a book if it's not available in Logos. I'm not going to spend the cash that way. And my resources need to be in that field for them to be the most effective for me.
And that's a transition for me too, Phil, because I bought some stuff on Kindle. Kenny mentions Kindle. If Kindle doesn't have it, he doesn't read it. The problem with the Kindle for me and for you is that we can't transition that as easily into a note. We can do it, but it's a lot of processes to that.
A lot of steps.
But yeah. Whereas in Logos, if it's in Logos, it is a very simple click point kind of thing. And so the more we go forward, what you see with us is we're moving away from the Kindle platform because it doesn't do what we need it to do in the note taking. And I don't use it for Sermon Creator like you do, but in all of those ways, it's a lot more powerful. And again, even though you switch, we've talked about Logos a couple of times, but to those who've not heard this, every time you switch devices, you sign in, and all of that stuff comes down from the cloud with you. You don't lose it, which is the fantastic part of all of that.
Right. And I just remembered something. I got a note about this post that I just chopped into the chat. If you're interested in Logos stuff this month, if you use the little code PAM 2020, Logos is giving you $20 worth of books. And so, $20 worth of whatever they sell, and it's straight up off of the discounted price. Even it's a $20 gift card, basically. They also give a free book away every month, and also Faith Life eBooks does the same thing, which is part of that same family. I just found that out today, that they give out a free book every month. The differences, by the way, between the Faith Life eBooks and the Logos stuff is the Faith Life ebook stuff tends to be more devotional, whereas the Logos stuff tends to be more academic in its structure and layout. But
so we're just going to
say
it. It's a little fluffier. The Faith Life stuff's a little fluffier, which means it's the stuff I'll read more than what Phil will read, because I
read both. Hey, look, there's nothing wrong with being fluffy.
No. I'm definitely fluffy.
Any last comments, Terry? I know we've kind of got our set schedule, trying to stay around 30 to 40 minutes.
Hey, just thanks for tuning in and listening to us, and good to have Kenny on the Zoom side. I really appreciate that.
Kenny, we're going to give you the standard privilege. If you jump into the Zoom after our live broadcast is finished, you get to hassle us in person if you so like.
You get to join what we call the slumber party.
That's right.
The post-show slumber party. No, it's good to see Kenny joining in that way, and anybody's welcome to join in that way. But just grateful for everybody in the discussion. Good to see Mark and Shane. Everybody's down there. They mean a lot to us as well. So thanks for listening in, guys.
Everyone have a great day. If there's some way we can help you in your work in teaching, preaching, congregational matters, or something else Terry and I can help you with, please let us know. Our goal is to do our best in our work, and we want you to do the best you can in your work. Have a great day, and may God